So in this video, we're going to talk about the 10 most overrated cards from March of the Lich King. And the way I'm defining that is by comparing a card's star ratings to its actual real-life played rate in live Hearthstone. So for instance, to give you an example, Lingering Zombie here is the 10th most overrated card in this video. It got rated 4.9 stars by the community, which was first place. It tied Shadow of Demise and Soul Stealer for the top ratings, but in reality it's only in 0.7% of decks, which is only good for 65th place in the expansion. There are 64 cards getting played more than Lingering Zombie, so that is a huge difference, a 64 place difference. And as we go throughout this video, each card is going to have a higher and higher difference between its ranking on its rating and its ranking in reality. Now I'm just looking here at the actual fixed differences. There are some subjective opinions there. If a card is rated first, should it be higher on this list subjectively? Yeah, I think you could make that argument. A card falling from first to 65th might feel more significant than a card falling from 50th to 125th, but I just stuck to the numbers. Please feel free to draw your own conclusions. Now, I've also included a separate set of stats here, which is the card's individual drawn win rate versus the deck win rates of the decks it's in. And I did this because sometimes it can feel like a card that, you know, has like crazy numbers or just seems really, really powerful is trapped inside of a class or an archetype that is underperforming. And it can feel a little weird to say like, oh, I know that card is good. Just look at the numbers. It objectively makes so much sense, but it's trapped in warrior or priest or whatever. So comparing the deck win rate to the card's individual win rate can help us sometimes isolate the card's individual strengths. If its drawn win rate's really high, but the overall win rate's low, that might be because it's a standout, powerful card that's limited by its context. If it's got a bad class or deck or archetype that it's stuck inside, that can make us feel a little bit better about rating a card highly, but it underperforming across the entire meta. Now, Lingering Zombie is a really special case here. This card is rather interesting to talk about because, of course, you know, it got first place. We almost never see that in a video like this. Tied for first, and it's really not getting played much. Now, part of that is Aggro Druid is currently about a tier 3 deck, and that means it's not getting played a lot, just a little bit here. But interestingly, Lingering Zombie is being cut from a handful of Aggro Druid lists. Right now, it looks like about half are running it and half aren't. Which, you know, that means Lingering Zombie is an okay card. It's not by any means some disastrous performance here, totally unplayed. A lot of the cards in this video will be that. They're going to be just, you've never seen them in your life kind of cards. So this one's fine. It's fine. But the important distinction here is that if a card's being rated 4.9 stars, the literal highest score in all of the ratings, you expect it to be a lot better than fine. Fine is not good enough, right? It has to be absolutely insane and crazy. And if you look at like Shadow of Demise, for instance, that card is totally insane and crazy. It's the third most played card in the set. It's great in Rogue. Of course, they love running it. Rogue's insanely good. So, you know, there is a real difference there from fine to absolutely nuts, which is where a first place card needs to live. So it's important to remember as we go throughout this video, I'm not saying all of these cards are objectively terrible, and I'm also not giving up hope on a lot of these cards. I think many of them will actually turn out to be great cards. They're just overrated so far. Right now, they haven't found their home, they haven't found their place. And by discussing the context of these win rates and how we assess these cards, we might be able to break down which cards I think can kind of escape this current overrated status and eventually be good and live up to their expectations, and perhaps identify cards where I see less opportunity there. And I'm curious to hear everybody else's takes on each card as well. Do you think it's going to be stuck forever as an overrated card, or will it be good? Because for instance, for Lingering Zombie to be great, wouldn't take much. Get some kind of early game death rattle synergy and boom, this card's absolutely crazy. Whereas right now, it looks like it's merely fine. Its drawn win rate's actually a little bit worse than the deck's average, so it's definitely not an overperformer. It's not standing out above its deck. It looks like it's just a fine fit, which does not live up to the first place status of this card. So next up here we have Vexillus, and this one was rated at 4.6 stars, but is only showing up in 0.2% of decks. That is a 9th place rating, tied for 9th, but falling all the way to 82nd, a difference of 73 spots. And those are going to keep getting bigger as we go throughout the video, of course. That's why they're in this order. And when it comes to Vexillus, though, as we look at his individual win rate versus the deck's win rate, it does seem like he is certainly a standout card. If you're trying to do combo mage stuff with all of these arcane spells, then yeah, Vexillus is certainly the powerhouse of that deck and probably the reason you're trying to do it. As you can see, his drawn win rate is 1.7% higher than the deck itself. So there might be some potential here if there's additional support or metas line up where, you know, an arcane combo mage slots in better or just has the right matchups and lineups. Maybe Vexillus would become a pretty good card in that world. So I certainly have not given up hope here on Vexillus based on this data. But it is interesting so far that despite coming in with all of these other arcane cards, we've actually seen arcane aggro mages succeed. They're just not running Vexillus, and they're also not running Magister's Apprentice, which, spoiler alert, is also going to be in this video. So it seems that Vexillus is actually a little bit slow. The more combo enably stuff that's coming into the late game is actually just not fast enough. Whereas an aggro mage that's just getting on the ground and going under people and running through them with more aggressive starts and more immediate follow-ups seems to be doing a little bit better than kind of setting up for these late game finishers. It really probably points a little bit to the speed of Hearthstone, that you have to go fast. You can't take forever. You got to get stuff down and start hitting people, not just biding your time for a combo finisher like Vexillus instead. So next up here we have the Acolyte of Death. One of our Death Knight cards. Rating here was 4.0, which was good for 50th place. Reality is 0.05% of decks. 125th place, basically non-existent. This card is not really seeing any play. And then when it comes to the drawn versus deck win rate, as you can see, it's 7% lower than its deck. Now, I will warn you, that's on a pretty small sample size here because there's just not a lot of data with this one. So the numbers might be a little bit off there. It'd be hard to say that's statistically significant or accurate. But nonetheless, as we know, this card's not good enough to warrant getting played. I think part of that right now is it's fit within its rune type. It's a Frost type card, and Frost just doesn't have a playstyle that really befits this friendly undead dying aspect. Of course, there's always like the hero power for Death Knight, but Frost is not running a lot of small little chippy token minions that you're going to be trading in to net a bunch of card draw. On top of that, they just have other ways to draw cards really efficiently and immediately without these conditions. So they don't need a card like Acolyte of Death. All their other stuff is just doing it way better. So until we see perhaps some multi-rune decks where you can splash this in an Unholy Swarm deck and then suddenly it starts to make a lot more sense, I don't really think the Acolyte of Death is going to get there. This kind of conditional card draw with this 3-mana overhead might just not keep up with modern Hearthstone, where we need really cheap, non-conditional, immediate card draw that's playing more directly to a game plan, whereas this is only going to work in certain scenarios and often just like, okay, I top deck this, great, I am sitting on a spider tank that does nothing. Whereas if you top deck a normal card draw card that's immediate, you've got ways to use that right away. So I don't know, man. I think part of this is a deck fit problem or a rune fit problem almost. But I do wonder if there's some just fundamental flaws with this style of card draw in modern day Hearthstone. I don't know that it works quite as well. So I'm not really expecting the Acolyte of Death here to overcome these problems. I think this card will probably remain unplayed for quite a while. Not totally hopeless, I guess, but I don't see it breaking free of these numbers. All right, so next up here is the Scourge Tamer. This card, I don't think I've played this card yet, to be honest. Let me be straight with you. But it was rated 4.5 stars, which is good for 18th place. That's really, really high for the record. Top 20 is like crazy cards. But only in 0.1% of decks. That is 93rd place. Just barely making it inside the top 100 here. And I think the win rates on this one tell a really interesting story. This is being played in decks with good win rates, 51.4%. So north of 50%, you're winning games with Scourge Tamer in your deck. But the Scourge Tamer is actually probably making your deck a little worse. The drawn win rate on this card's not actually great, which that's kind of interesting because Beast Hunter is who's running this card. And there's some great Beast Hunter decks out there, depending on your rank. Actually, right now, Beast Hunter can be tier 1. And we've got some people squeezing in the Scourge Tamer, probably because it's fun and less about the fact that it's improving your win rate. I suspect the people who are running this aren't really thinking it's making their deck better, but they're probably just really enjoying making zombies because it's a super fun card. So it's getting a little played here as like a pet popularity card as opposed to really contributing, which I think is pretty cool. Now, of course, people aren't rating cards based on their fun levels, or at least most people aren't. Perhaps there are some out there. So that doesn't, change the fact that this is indeed overrated. Clearly, its power level right now is not living up to the expectations. People probably thought the zombies were going to be a higher quality or more consistent than they are in reality. So yeah, it's still befitting for this list for sure, but I kind of like that it's living up to its fun level perhaps here, and that's why there are some people squeezing this in. Obviously still quite rare at 0.1%, but pretty cool that a card like this can be played in good decks just because. All right, so next up here we have the Crystal Smith Cultist. This one landed at 4.3 stars, 28th place. In reality, only in 0.08% of decks. That's outside the top 100. Certainly not getting any play right now. When it comes to win rates, he's not too bad, but certainly not outperforming his deck. That kind of makes sense for a card like this. I don't expect this to have any kind of crazy numbers. This is sort of a workhorse card. It does, just get some stats down, gets a body rolling, but it's not doing anything absolutely crazy. And, I have a little hope for this card. I think there's a chance a more direct minion-based aggro Shadow Priest still sees some play. That's something that's kind of been floating around a little bit since Stormwind and has had some peaks that were actually pretty high, even getting nerfed from time to time. And I think that's certainly possible to come back. For now, the sort of Bless Priest Naga stuff has taken the forefront for the more early game driven Priest decks, because that has some absolutely insane power spikes, and this just doesn't play to that. You don't need this sort of more flat, consistent performer. But sometimes, especially in smaller metas where we don't have quite as many expansions in play, cards like this that are consistent do a little bit better than cards that are power spiky. So I wonder if the Crystal Smith Cultist might still get play at some point. I don't know if he's going to live up to top 30 status. I don't know that he's going to be better than 30 other cards in March of the Lich King, but playable. Is he going to find a home that's a decent tier 2, tier 3 deck? I wouldn't count him out just yet. So moving on here, we've got the Twisted Tether for Warlock. This one was a 4-star card again, 50th place again, tied there. And 0.03% of decks this time, 132nd place. So basically, no one's ever seen this card. I don't think I've had this card played against me that I can remember anyway. Win rates here, clearly the decks aren't doing well that are running Twisting Tether, but it's not doing especially well in those decks either. It's not like, my deck's bad, but when I play that Twisted Tether, boy, oh boy, I'm winning a lot of games. It's not outperforming its peers there. I'm a little sad. I thought this card was going to be good too. I give this one 4 stars. By the way, I haven't been talking about my ratings much, but they're always down there if you want to see and compare. It looks great, right? Like, remove something and get some awesome stats in hand. But as we find out more and more in Hearthstone, I think you have to play for really synergistic game plans. You have to play for pretty quick game plans these days. And I don't know that this one is serving either of those purposes. Removing a single thing for 4 mana, that's kind of pricey these days. And just getting a pile of stats, it doesn't really drive a synergy in particular either. So this is another one of those cards, though, that I think, again, when we hit a rotation, we have less cards in the pool in total. This could be better. Just plopping down a big thing on turn 5 after a turn 4 Twisted Tether is the kind of play that makes more sense as more and more synergies are extracted out of the game when expansions rotate and we have fewer total cards. So I'm still hopeful that some kind of greedier, controllier Warlock is able to use this as one of their tools, maybe even just like a one of in their deck. It might be good. I don't know if it'll ever actually hit 4 stars. Feels like a 3-star card. One of those fringe playable things. But again, I still like a lot of what this card does. It's got a good return, basically. Kind of a righteous defense in Paladin, but slightly more expensive, but Warlock can usually tolerate that. So next up here, we have the Magister's Apprentice, rated at 4.6 stars, only in 0.1% of decks. A fall from 9th to 93rd there. Big old drop. And I think this one's the same story as Vexilus. Basically, the cards that enable this right now, the synergies that it has, are all about setting up some kind of combo finisher turn, and a lot of decks right now are just going under that and murdering you before you have a chance to pull that off. So despite the crazy mana cheat here and all the things that you can do all in one turn, it's while you're sitting there trying to accrue all those pieces and get all of that organized that you're just kind of falling over dead. So Arcane Mage instead is playing much faster, getting minions down early. A card like this does not support that game plan quite as well, because this is all about that big pop-off turn that comes later than a lot of other decks. Big pop-off turns, and therefore just isn't quite good enough. So that said, you know, this is one of those cards that's super scary. As you can see, I gave this 5 stars myself. It's like, hey man, this much mana cheat's always good in Hearthstone. Surely Apprentice will be good. I still kind of believe there's a lot of potential on this one. If we lose, again, I keep going back to this point, but if we lose a lot of the lethality that's currently in the meta at rotation time, and decks like this have more time to get things moving and get things rolling, then you've still got all the pieces for this arcane combo stuff. It's still got the Vexilus, it's still got the Arcane Bolts. So if the meta slows down, a card like this has more time to get all that moving, and then it becomes a nice finisher, where it's a turn or two slower than others, but if everybody else gets a turn or two slower, then it starts to compete. So I would definitely still keep my eye on the Magister's Apprentice here. Overrated for now, but certainly I think still a lot of potential. So next up is the Rotten Rodent, one of the Death Rattle synergy cards we got for Rogue, rated at 4.2 stars, good for 36th, in reality 0.05, only in 125th place. And this one's a particularly interesting card for 2 reasons. Number one, if you look at its win rate, it's actually really, really good when you hit it, right? Much like I think Kellis at the Vold, you hit this on turn 2, that's going to be some awesome discounts. So it does seem like a power outlier in its deck. Really, for the first time in this video, the card makes sense. The numbers are good. It's very efficient. A lot about the card's individual strengths and merits are pretty clear when you look at how much its win rate stands out compared to the decks that it's in. But on the other side of the equation, there was a really, really good Death Rattle Rogue deck that didn't need the Rotten Rodent. It didn't run it. You know, we had all of these crazy Kobold Illusionist plays and Invincibles and Infectious Ghouls and all this stuff that got nerfed. It was so good it got nerfed, but the Rotten Rodent was nowhere to be seen because it didn't really synergize with what that deck was trying to do. It had a very specific sequence of events that needed to unfold, and the Rotten Rodent, number one, didn't really help those, and number two, actually could disrupt them because this has the undead tag and could unfortunately mess with some of the synergies in that deck. So even though there was a really good tier 1 deck that seemed like it would have made sense for this, what seems to be a very powerful card, they didn't quite sync up, right? They didn't really make sense together, which that's a pretty rare case to see. So I think a lot of us, myself included, with the 4-star rating here, saw the potential individually of this card, saw all of those Death Rattle pieces finally coming together and making sense. I think I remember saying specifically, like, this is finally it. It's Death Rattle Rogue has enough to be good, which was true. It just had enough that it didn't even need the Rotten Rodent, which is pretty crazy. This one was hard to anticipate. Now, that said, is Death Rattle Rogue going to get enough support in the future for the Rotten Rodent? I kind of wonder if it's going to not. I think this might be one of those where they kind of made their push for Death Rattle Rogue, and then it's left at the wayside for the next few sets. So, you know, even though Rotten Rodent does make a lot of sense individually, its power level is there as an individual card, I don't know that it's going to get the synergy pieces to actually be good in the future. I think we may never really see the Rotten Rodent show up in the Hearthstone meta, but it wouldn't take much because I do think this card really stands out from a power level standpoint. So next up here is the Fierce Outsider for Demon Hunter. This one got 4.2 star rating, 36 plays, but only 0.04% of decks. That's 128th place. And it's interesting because Demon Hunter's been really good, actually. Very, very strong, powerful class in this expansion, but it has completely abandoned these outcast cards. Even though this is a super high tempo card, incredibly efficient card, it looks nuts when you look at all these numbers, right? It's got a premium stat line, or for rush anyway, a premium stat line, a crazy discount effect. Like, man, this card does a lot for 1 mana. It's reactive, it's threatening, it's efficient. It's like, man, that's a home run, right? And we all reflected that in our ratings. We thought it was going to be pretty darn good. And in fact, the card's individual numbers also showcase that. It's better than its deck. So when you're playing this in these outcast energy decks, hitting this card means you're doing really well. This is powering the deck. it's fueling things. It's why you're excited to play an Outcast Demon Hunter for sure. It's a standout, but Outcast Demon Hunter is just not good enough compared to all of the other crazy Demon Hunter things that are happening with the various Scythe builds and quest builds and so on. This cheats a single mana point. Quest for Demon Hunter cheats a lot of mana points, and therefore the Fierce Outsider just can't keep up. So what that means, though, is I think there's a lot of hope still for this card as things like Quest rotate out. The Fierce Outsider and the Outcast package are going to be sitting there waiting in the wings to power the next phase of Demon Hunter, perhaps. And Outcast being a base keyword for Demon Hunters, they're going to get more Outcast cards. So this card has definitely been overrated so far, definitely overshadowed by the other Demon Hunter stuff. But I think this card will be very, very good in the near future. Certainly keep an eye on this one. If I'm going to bank on any card in this video to get play in the future, it's something like this. This one should be great. So overrated now, not overrated perhaps in 6 months if we take a look at this card again. And then for the top spot, we have its peer here. This is Fellerin the Forgotten. This was one of the coolest looking legendaries I thought of the entire expansion. Really excited, like looked very powerful. You know, this fun kind of value generator that baked some tempo in with it as well. You know, I like the chaos of it, the crazy efficiency of it. It looked really nuts. Gave it a strong 4 stars. You guys gave it 4.6 stars. Again, tied for 9th place. Of course, in reality, just not good enough. Much like our previous card, Demon Hunter's doing other things. They don't need a card like Fellerin, even though this would almost seem like a free one of in a lot of metas and environments. It's like, oh, this card's so good on its own, I'm just going to toss it into my deck. It's like a nice little bonus, right? We can't do that right now with Demon Hunter because they have to run a specific number of set minions for their Scythe decks. Their no minion decks have a limited number of minions, so you can't even toss Fellerin in as a free bonus when you might be able to in past metas. So again, the numbers on this card just look insane. There's so much about it that screams to us that it's gonna be good, but so far has underperformed, landing outside the top 100. Again, though, you can see its draw and win rate's super high. As soon as you get an Outcast deck that's looking good, Fellerin's going to be a really, really powerful card. So not in the meta right now, but absolutely a card that is not going to stay overrated for long, I don't think. I think this is going to be a really good, really frustrating card in the future. So absolutely do not give up hope on these last 2 cards. These are going to shake things up in the future. I'm almost certain. So there you have it, folks. The cards that are overrated so far in March of the Lich King. I'm curious to hear which ones of these you think still have a chance and which ones you're giving up on. Which cards are never going to actually see any play versus the ones that are really hopeful. I guess if I look, I'm pretty hopeful for most of these, to be honest. I still think a lot of these have a chance to get played. I thought Lingering Zombie was one of the most interesting in this video. It just seems so nuts. It just makes so much sense. But so far, the numbers just aren't there. So I'm curious. What do you think about Lingering Zombie and beyond? Share all your thoughts on these cards and more in the comments below. Tell me what cards you think are going to be the most underrated of the expansion, because, of course, that is a video coming up very soon. The cards we thought were going to suck but have exceeded expectations. I haven't even looked at the list yet. I ran the numbers, but I don't know what it is. So I'm curious just like you. But stay tuned to the next day or two for that video. Thanks so much, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.